Hello everybody, welcome to episode 262 of Show For You, where today I'll be going over the singular best episode in all of Bleach, hands down in my opinion. It's better than Ulquiorra vs. Ichigo, it's better than Ichigo vs. Kenpachi, it's better than the final battle with, Aizen, it's better than all of the Fullbringer arc, even though the Fullbringer arc is genuinely probably one of my favorites in all of Bleach. But yeah, so, episode 5 of season 4 of Bleach 1000 Year Blood War. So, just kind of start off, we see as the fight between Ichigo and Yhwach is continuing. However, first got to focus on Rukia and Renji. So, Rukia and Renji ultimately end up making it to the palace area, where Renji stays back and fights off the Colossus with Chad and gang. And we then see as Rukia is sent off to the palace, that's the inner chambers of the palace, to help Ichigo fight Yhwach, because Chad informed them that, they're fighting up there. So Rukia heads off to do that. Now we get to see how the Grand Rey Zero plus Getsuga Tensho does against Yhwach. Nothing. It does a tiddlywink of nothing. It does zilch. The zilch. Zero. Nada. So, ultimately, Yhwach just ends up, slapping this away, essentially, not taking any damage, really, and straight up impales Ichigo. Ichigo is sitting on that thing like, Luffy on Crocodile's Hook, or Luffy getting speared by Emu recently. So we see as he's sitting here, ultimately Orihime sees this, and Orihime is freaking out. We get some really cool, dark looking panels of Orihime. This episode does Orihime well. This episode genuinely is probably my favorite performance we've ever seen of Orihime. Genuinely, in my opinion, it's better than even her speech with Ichigo, where she's talking about how in all the world she would love him and everything. That is, this episode was great for Orihime. So, we see this, she ultimately ends up using her reject ability to reverse this, so Ichigo is not stabbed. But then Yhwach gets a hold of this, and he's like, you know what, I'm just gonna start stabbing you. So he just ends continuously impaling her. And this ultimately stops when Rukia pulls up. Rukia pulls up just in time, and her and Ichigo end up joining forces to fight Yhwach. So we see they both kind of go at it at first, however, they're beat back pretty easily. Now, also, during this time, we get to see as Uryu is, in fact, still losing to Haschwalth, because Haschwalth is really just predicting all of his moves with his prescience ability. So, we end up going back to the fight where, like I said, we see Rukia and Ichigo are kind of beaten, and we see Orihime still kind of agonizing over being weak. She's just mentioning about how if she just had more power, if she just had more power, if she just had more power. But we then see as Ichigo pulls out his Bankai. Now we get to see a hollified Bankai of Ichigo. So he has two horns now, and he's in his, obviously, Zangetsu attire and all of that. So he is now going up relatively well against Yhwach with the assistance of Rukia as well. She's using her Shikai. Well, I don't know if we see her use her Shikai, but she's in her ice abilities and all of that. So, since it continues, ultimately, they kind of start planning a little bit because it is still going difficult for them. So we then see as Rukia pulls out her Bankai as well. However, Yhwach, he ain't having any of this. He's able to beat away Ichigo and impales and freezes Rukia. So it's looking bad here. And Orihime is still kind of left behind, agonizing over being weak and watching them just defend her. So, we then end up going back to Uryu versus Haschwalth, where we see as Uryu it looked like he's about to get killed. He's just pinned up against the wall, and Haschwalth's speaking about, this is the end for you. My power is essentially complete. And we see as Uryu keeps looking at this little pin on Haschwalth's glove, forearm area. And he ultimately ends up revealing to Haschwalth that he has figured out his power. His prescience has a 3-second cooldown. He's kind of like, that's actually a different comparison, but kind of like the World or something like that. How Dio can only maintain his time stop. I think is it 5 seconds or 3 seconds? I think it's 5. No. Yeah, I think it's 5. Or was that the World in Steel Ball Run? I don't remember. It doesn't really important. So yeah, sorry about the Steel Ball Run spoiler, by the way. But yeah, see this, and ultimately he figured it out. It has a 3-second cooldown. So Uryu now uses this to his own gain and is performing moves in the cooldown so that Haschwalth cannot predict them. He ends up pulling Haschwalth's little pin, and Haschwalth loses his prescience ability. So then we end up going back to the main fight. And we see as Orihime is getting up, and she is broken, essentially. We see as she starts releasing her little, I can't remember exactly what they're called, but her little fairies, little jet-looking things around her. And they start kind of spinning around, and they form this big circle. And we see Orihime go through this circle, and it looks like as if her spirit is ripped out of her or something like that. And she starts to head towards Yuhabaha. She is mentioning about how if she just had enough power, she will sacrifice her all to ensure that Ichigo lives. So she ends up pulling up to Ichigo. This orange, kind of almost looking like her reject ability, starts to form on her head. And we see as Ichigo is freaking out about this, he's like, yo, Orihime, it looks like she's about to sacrifice herself or something like that. And we then see as Orihime ends up essentially blowing up right in front of Yuhabaha. And Yuhabaha is not really able to do anything because, like, we saw prior to this as well, that her fairies were able to deflect, like, the energy blast Yuhabaha releases. So she gets up here, blows up in front of Yuhabaha, and the episode ends. Holy smokes. Now, that's the thing. Just speaking about this episode doesn't do it justice. Yes, it's great justice, especially because of how Orihime is characterized throughout this. Orihime, like, it is so cool to see how she handles this scene and all of that. We get to really see a side of Orihime that we haven't much got to see before. And that is the thing, though. This episode's animation, in my opinion, I've been watching anime for 3 years now. I've watched a lot of anime in that time. This episode is genuinely one of my favorite anime episodes I've ever watched. The animation is hands down some of the greatest I've ever seen. Like, it might pass even some Mappa level stuff, and that's saying a lot. So, like, it's just genuinely inexplicable, or I guess unable to be explained through words, how beautiful and how well done this animation is. Studio Period, however you want to say their name, did great here. It is undeniable. They did phenomenal with this. So yeah, it just looks great. This episode is a masterclass. It is an art piece, and like there was not a second in this episode where I like wanted to look away from the screen. For the entire time, I was locked in. I was just like, and like I didn't know where the stakes were gonna go. Like I don't know if Urihime is alive or not. Like I know some stuff about Bleach, and I presume that she's not based off what I know. But like maybe I just know wrong or something like that, or maybe the circumstances around it are different. So I'm of the opinion that Orihime may legit just be dead, or at least her physical body may be just dead here. But yeah, so this episode, I loved it. Like I said, it's my favorite in all of Bleach, and one of my favorites in all of anime that I've watched. So yeah, go watch this episode. Even if you're not a Bleach fan, can't even know what's going on. If you can just sit here, turn off your brain, just watch it, because you'll be locked in the entire time, because the animation is beautiful. But yeah, so that's all it really is for episode 5 of season 4 of Bleach: Thousand Year Blood War. That's all I really have for episode 262 of Shelf Review. So thank you very much for watching.